She was just a nursing student working late nights at an upscale Korean BBQ house until she noticed the blood beneath a dangerous man's expensive suit and did something that should have gotten her killed. What happened next pulled her into a war she'd spent years avoiding. Ammani Rivers had perfected the art of staying neutral. At just 23, she worked the late shift, serving Atlanta's elite, carefully navigating the dangerous politics of her neighborhood by refusing to choose sides. But one moment of instinct, using her medical training to save a dying customer, shattered the invisibility she'd built her life around. Because Ammani wasn't just serving tables that night, she was tending to wounds that told a story of betrayal, and the man bleeding out in front of her was powerful enough to drag her into the violence or make her untouchable. The scent of sizzling galbi should have masked everything else, but Ammani had learned in her first semester of nursing school that blood has a smell nothing can hide. Metallic, sharp, wrong. She approached table 7 with her order pad and her best service smile, the one that made wealthy customers forget she existed the moment she turned away. The man sitting there radiated the kind of dangerous calm that made even the kitchen staff find reasons to stay busy elsewhere. Her shirt hung open despite the restaurant's unspoken dress code, revealing ink that probably cost more than her entire semester's tuition. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you with—" His eyes met hers, and Ammani's rehearsed greeting died in her throat, not because of the cold calculation in his gaze, but because of what she saw beneath it, the slight glaze, the barely perceptible tremor in his left hand as it rested on the table, the way his breathing, though controlled, came just a fraction too shallow. She'd seen this before. Clinicals, emergency room rotation, a construction worker who dismissed his symptoms as food poisoning until he'd collapsed in the waiting room. "Water," he said in English, his accent minimal. "And time." Ammoni's pen hovered over her pad, but her eyes tracked the details her training had taught her to see. The cuts on his chest weren't just from a fight. They were defensive wounds, clustered wrong. The bruising around his ribs showed a pattern: impact, struggle, escape. But it was the subtle discoloration spreading beneath his tattoos that made her pulse quicken. Cyanosis, early stage. Of course, she stepped closer, angling her body to block the view from the kitchen. Her voice dropped. "The water will help with the nausea, but not the toxin." His hand moved so fast she barely registered it before his fingers locked around her wrist. Not violent, precise. The grip of someone who knew exactly how much pressure it took to hold without breaking. "What did you say?" Ammani kept her voice steady, professional, the same tone she used when delivering bad news to patients who thought they just had the flu. "Your respiratory rate is elevated, your pupils are constricted, and that discoloration spreading under your left ribcage suggests vascular compromise. Someone didn't just hurt you, they dosed you with something." She met his eyes. "Probably when they cut you. The blade was coated." For 3 seconds, he said nothing. Then his grip loosened, though his gaze never wavered. "You're certain?" "I'm in my final year at Emory's nursing program." Ammani glanced at the door, calculating. "And if I'm right, you have maybe 2 hours before your organs start shutting down. So either you let me help you, or you bleed out trying to look dignified while your own people hunt you." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Just a waitress?" "Just a waitress who knows exactly what dying looks like." She pulled her wrist free. "Now, are you ordering or are we leaving?" Jaemin studied her for a long moment, and Ammani forced herself not to look away. In her neighborhood, looking away meant weakness. In nursing school, looking away meant you missed the detail that killed your patient. She'd learned to hold her ground in both worlds, even when everything in her screamed to run. "Sit," he said finally. "That's not how this works. You're the woman who just diagnosed poisoning in 15 seconds. His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "So sit, take my order, and tell me what else you see." Ammani slid into the booth across from him, her pad still raised like a shield of normalcy. To anyone watching, she was just getting details for a complicated order. Her manager would have her head for sitting with a customer, but her manager also wasn't trying to save a man's life. The blade was likely coated with something that inhibits clotting, she whispered, pen moving across her pad as if writing down his preferences. That's why you're still bleeding hours later, but the discoloration suggests a secondary agent, something systemic. She paused, her clinical mind racing through possibilities. When did you start feeling the tremors? 40 minutes ago. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My lieutenant brought me water before we left the compound, said I looked pale. There it was, the piece that completed the picture. Ammani's pen stilled on the paper. Your lieutenant, she repeated carefully, the one who suggested coming here? Jamin's eyes went flat, and for the first time since she'd approached his table, Ammani saw something other than control in his expression. She saw fury, cold and absolute, layered beneath calculations she couldn't begin to parse. He said this place was secure, neutral ground. His fingers drummed once against the table, a gesture so small that it would have been invisible to anyone not looking for the cracks. Which means either he's incompetent or the people who poisoned you knew exactly where you'd be tonight. Ammani glanced toward the kitchen, where the sous chef had been watching table 7 with unusual intensity since Jamin arrived. How many people in this room report to your lieutenant? The question hung between them like a blade. Jamin's gaze swept the restaurant with new understanding. The hostess who'd seated him in the corner farthest from the exits, the waiter who'd been circling their section without ever approaching, the kitchen staff whose movements had grown strangely synchronized in the last 10 minutes. All of them, he said quietly. He recommended this location 3 months ago, said the owner owed him a favor. Ammani's stomach dropped. Then we're not leaving, we're escaping. We? His eyebrow raised slightly. You think they'll let me walk out of here after seeing your wounds? She met his eyes. I'm the witness who knows too much, which means right now I'm the only person in this room who needs you alive as much as you do. The gunshot didn't sound like the movies. It was sharper, flatter, a sound that punched through the ambient music and sizzling grills with brutal finality. The front window spiderwebbed into 1,000 fractures, and suddenly everyone was screaming. Everyone except the man across from Ammani, who moved with a speed that contradicted the poison in his veins. Jamin flipped the table as 2 more shots punched through where his head had been seconds before. Ammani hit the floor, her server's instincts kicking in. She knew every inch of this restaurant's layout, every exit, every corner that couldn't be seen from the front entrance. She'd memorized them during her first week, back when she still thought the biggest danger was getting caught in someone else's gang territory dispute. She'd been so naive. Kitchen, she hissed, already crawling toward the swing doors. Stay low. Jamin followed without question, his movements fluid despite the way his left arm had started to shake. The tremors were getting worse. They had less time than she'd calculated. The kitchen erupted into chaos as they burst through the doors. Cooks scattered, orders forgotten. But Ammani saw the sous chef reach for something beneath the prep station, something that definitely wasn't a knife. Move! She shoved Jamin toward the walk-in freezer as a bullet tore through the stainless steel counter where he'd been standing seconds before. The sous chef was screaming in Korean, words Ammani didn't understand, but whose meaning was crystal clear. Jamin responded in the same language, his voice cutting through the chaos with an authority that made the sous chef hesitate, just for a second. Long enough for Ammani to grab a cast-iron skillet from the hanging rack and swing it with every ounce of strength her nursing school weight training had built. The sous chef dropped like a stone. Service tunnel, Ammani gasped, already pulling Jamin past the freezer to the narrow door marked employees only. Connects to the building next door, old delivery route they never sealed properly. Behind them, she heard boots on tile, heavy, professional, multiple sets. The tunnel was exactly as cramped and filthy as she remembered from the one time she'd helped retrieve supplies from the shared storage basement. Bare bulbs cast shadows that made every corner a potential threat. Jamin's breathing had gone ragged, his skin taking on an ashen quality that made Ammani's clinical alarm bells scream. How much further? His words came slower now. 20 feet to the access ladder, then up to street level. She wrapped his arm over her shoulder, taking more of his weight than pride would normally let him give. "Stay with me. You don't get to die in a tunnel that smells like rotting kimchi." Noted. His attempt at humor came out slurred. They reached the ladder just as the service door behind them crashed open. Ammani looked up at the rungs, then at Jamin's trembling hands, and made a choice that would either save them both or kill them faster. "Climb, I'm right behind you." The car that screeched to a stop outside the access tunnel's exit wasn't what Ammani expected. Sleek, black, bulletproof glass, and the driver had Jamin's same cold calculation in his eyes when he kicked open the rear door without asking questions. "Get in." Ammani shoved Jamin into the backseat and dove in after him as bullets sparked off the pavement behind them. The driver hit the gas before she'd even closed the door, throwing her against Jamin's chest. She felt his heartbeat against her cheek. Too fast, too irregular. "How much further?" she demanded at the driver. "No hospitals." Jamin's voice had gone rough, his pupils now pinpoint specks despite the darkness. "They'll be watching every emergency room in the city." "Then he's dead in 30 minutes, Ammani snapped at the driver. "Do you have a first aid kit in this thing?" The driver jerked his chin toward the front passenger seat. "Under." Ammani lunged forward, yanking open the compartment. What she found wasn't a first aid kit, it was a tactical medical pack that belonged in a combat zone. Someone in Jamin's organization knew exactly what kind of emergencies they'd face. She dumped the contents across the seat, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, even as the car swerved through traffic. "I need light, and keep this car as steady as you can." The driver flicked on the interior lights and somehow smoothed out his driving without slowing down. Professional. Military training, probably. Ammani tore open Jamin's shirt completely, exposing the full extent of the damage. 3 deep lacerations across his ribs, still seeping blood that was too dark, too slow. The discoloration had spread, creeping up toward his chest like spilled ink. "This is going to hurt," she said, reaching for the antiseptic. "The poison is in your bloodstream, but it entered through these cuts. I need to flush the wounds, try to reduce the concentration." "Do it." His hand caught her wrist, grip weak but insistent. "Whatever it takes." Ammani didn't warn him again. She irrigated the wounds with antiseptic, ignoring his sharp intake of breath, ignoring the way his fingers dug into the leather seat. Blood and fluid ran down his skin, pooling in the expensive upholstery. She packed the deepest cut with gauze, applying pressure with one hand while the other searched the medical kit. There. Activated charcoal tablets, not ideal for topical poisoning, but if she could get them into his system. "Swallow ease," she ordered, crushing 3 tablets and mixing them with water from a bottle she found in the door. "They'll bind to whatever's left in your stomach." Jamin drank without hesitation, trust in his eyes that she hadn't earned but desperately needed him to keep. His pulse was weakening beneath her fingers. The tremors had progressed to full shakes. "Where are we going?" Ammani asked the driver, still maintaining pressure on Jamin's worst wound. "Somewhere safe." The driver's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. "Somewhere we control." "Then drive faster," she said quietly, "because safe won't matter if he's already gone." The safe house was a penthouse that probably cost more per month than Ammani's entire nursing school tuition. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Atlanta's glittering skyline, but the driver immediately closed heavy blackout curtains, transforming luxury into a fortress. Ammani had managed to stabilize Jamin enough to get him onto a leather couch, but his color was still wrong, his breathing still labored. She'd done everything she could with limited supplies. Now she needed real equipment, real medication, or this man would die in a penthouse that cost more than most people's houses. "There's a doctor," the driver said, phone already to his ear. 20 minutes out. He's clean." "He better be," Ammani muttered, checking Jamin's pulse again. Still thready, but holding. "Because if anyone else shows up planning to finish the job..."
No one knows about this location. Jaemin's eyes opened, clearer than they'd been in the car, but still glazed with pain. Only 3 people. Me, Jinwoo, and... His jaw clenched. And Minsuk. The name came out like poison itself. Ammani sat back on her heels, reading the devastation beneath his controlled expression. She'd seen grief before, working hospital rotations. She knew the difference between losing a patient and losing someone who mattered. This was both. Minsuk, she repeated carefully. Your lieutenant? My brother. Jaemin's hand moved to his chest, fingers hovering over the worst of the wounds. Not by blood, by choice. 23 years, since we were 15, stealing food to survive in Busan. His laugh was bitter, painful. I made him my second-in-command 5 years ago, trusted him with everything, my business, my family, my life. Ammani understood betrayal. She'd grown up watching her neighborhood tear itself apart over loyalties that shifted like sand. But this was different. This was surgical, calculated, personal. What changed? Jaemin's eyes fixed on something distant, something she couldn't see. 3 months ago, a rival organization's son stole from us. Young, stupid, desperate. Minsuk wanted him executed as an example. He paused, his breathing shallow. I sent him home with a warning instead. And Minsuk saw that as weakness. He saw it as the end of everything we'd built. Jaemin's voice carried decades of history, of violence, of a world where mercy was measured in blood. He said I'd gone soft, that the man who'd clawed his way out of poverty had forgotten what it took to stay on top. Ammani pressed fresh gauze against his wounds, feeling his pulse beneath her fingers, steady enough to keep talking, weak enough to remind her how close he'd come to not making it at all. So he poisoned you, set up the ambush, made sure you'd die in a restaurant full of his people, and no one would question it. While he took everything I built and turned it into the empire he thinks I should have created, the empire I refused to become. The doctor arrived with an efficiency that told Ammani he'd done this before, treated wounds that couldn't be explained, asked no questions, and disappeared into the night with an envelope of cash. He confirmed what she'd suspected. Organophosphate poisoning, likely mixed with an anticoagulant. Jaemin would survive, but recovery would take days, maybe weeks. Days they apparently didn't have. The penthouse filled with people as dawn broke over Atlanta. Not the dangerous men Ammani expected, but a small boy who couldn't have been more than 7, running through the door with a woman close behind. Samchan! The boy launched himself at the couch before anyone could stop him. Jaemin caught him with his good arm, wincing but holding tight. Careful, Junho, your uncle's a little broken right now. The woman, petite, elegant, with eyes that held the same calculation as Jaemin's, stopped short when she saw Ammani. Who's she? The reason I'm alive. Jaemin's hand remained on the boy's shoulder, protective. Ammani, this is my sister, Heroine, and my nephew. Heroine's expression didn't soften, but something shifted in her posture. Recognition, maybe, or the kind of debt that couldn't be repaid with money. Minsuk called this morning, said there was an incident at the restaurant, a tragedy. He's already moving to consolidate power, claiming you named him successor before... Her voice cracked just slightly. Before you died. Junho looked up at Jaemin, confused. But you're not dead. Not yet, Jaemin murmured, smoothing the boy's hair. Thanks to a very smart woman who knows how to see what others miss. More people arrived throughout the morning, an older couple who ran a grocery store and looked at Jaemin like he'd personally saved their lives, because, Ammani learned, he had, buying their debt when loan sharks came calling. A young woman with scars on her arms who worked at Jaemin's legitimate import company, given a job when no one else would hire her after prison. A teenager who called Jaemin Hyung and brought him terrible coffee with the kind of devotion that spoke of someone who'd been pulled from a darker path. These weren't soldiers. They were people. the human infrastructure beneath the violence, the ones who depended on a man who'd chosen mercy over fear. Ammani watched them come and go, each one bringing news of Min-suk's takeover, each one pledging loyalty to a man who could barely sit up without wincing. She'd spent 3 years perfecting neutrality, convincing herself that if she didn't choose sides, she couldn't be blamed for the consequences. But Junho was curled against his uncle now, sleeping peacefully, trusting that the man who'd been poisoned by his own brother would somehow still protect him. "This is what he'll destroy," Heroine said quietly, appearing beside Ammani. "Everyone who believed my brother's way was better than the old way, the brutal way." Ammani looked at the sleeping child. "Then we don't let him." The blood work came back while Junho was still asleep on the couch, his small hand clutching his uncle's sleeve. The doctor had taken samples before he left, promising results within hours through channels that didn't involve hospitals or questions. Ammani studied the report, her nursing training cutting through the technical jargon to find the details that mattered. "Chlorpyrifos," she said, looking up at Jaemin, "mixed with warfarin. That's not street-level stuff. This is agricultural grade, the kind used in industrial farming, regulated, traceable." Heroine leaned over her shoulder, scanning the report. Min-suk wouldn't know where to source this. He's muscle and strategy, not chemistry. Which means he had help, Jaemin shifted carefully, trying not to wake Junho. Someone with access to commercial toxins, someone who wanted this to look like a professional hit from outside our organization. Ammani's mind raced through the possibilities, connecting dots the way she'd learned to connect symptoms to diagnosis. The rival organization you mentioned, the one whose son you let go, they'd have motive. The Huang family, Jaemin's expression darkened. They run distribution through the port, legitimate imports, produce, flowers, commercial goods, but also the infrastructure to move anything they want through customs, including agricultural chemicals. Ammani pulled out her phone, already searching. Her cousin worked for the Department of Agriculture, had complained just last month about missing inventory at one of the port warehouses. She'd tuned it out then, focused on her own world, her own problems. Now that deliberate ignorance felt like a weapon she'd handed to someone else. She found the conversation thread, scrolling back through messages until she located what she needed. There was a theft reported 6 weeks ago, 50 gallons of chlorpyrifos from a warehouse the Huang family manages, never recovered. Jinwoo, who'd been standing guard by the door, stepped forward. Min-suk met with someone from the Huang organization 2 months ago, said it was about territory disputes, keeping communication open. It was about purchasing a coup. Jaemin's voice went cold, the kind of cold that reminded Ammani exactly how dangerous this man could be when he chose. Min-suk approached them with a deal. He'd eliminate me, take control, and give them the aggressive expansion they wanted, the violence I refused to deliver. Ammani watched the pieces fall into place, saw the scope of the betrayal expand beyond one man's ambition into something coordinated, calculated. This wasn't just about power, it was about philosophy, mercy versus brutality, restraint versus domination. "So we prove it," she said. "We find the connection between Min-suk and the Huang family, documentation, money transfers, anything that shows this wasn't your lieutenant acting alone, but a coordinated attack." "And then?" Heroine asked. Ammani met Jaemin's eyes. "Then we make sure everyone in your organization knows the truth, that Min-suk didn't just betray you, he sold them all to your enemies." The meeting was set for midnight at a warehouse the organization used for legitimate storage. Neutral ground, Min-suk had called it, when Jaemin's message reached him through channels the traitor thought were secure. A chance to discuss transition of power now that the boss had miraculously survived. Min-suk's mistake was thinking Jaemin would come alone. Ammani stood in the shadows of a shipping container, her server's uniform replaced by dark clothes that let her blend into the warehouse's corners.
In her pocket was a USB drive containing bank records Jin-woo had pulled from Min Seok's hidden accounts, transfers from the Hwang family dating back 3 months, payments that lined up perfectly with the stolen toxins and the restaurant ambush. She'd spent her whole life being invisible. Tonight, she'd weaponize it. Min Seok arrived with 4 men, all armed, all radiating the kind of casual violence that came from years of enforcement work. He saw Jae-min standing in the center of the warehouse floor, still pale but upright, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment that the poison hadn't finished the job. "Hyung," the word came out careful, measured. "I'm glad you're alive. When I heard about the attack—" "You heard, or you orchestrated?" Min Seok's expression shifted, the mask of concern dropping into something colder. "I don't know what lies you've been told, but—"
Chlorpyrifos and warfarin, delivered on a coated blade, activated by water you personally handed me. Jae-min took a step forward despite the pain it clearly cost him. Sourced from the Hwang family, paid for with money you've been skimming for months. "Prove it." Ammani moved then, slipping between the shipping containers with the same efficiency she used navigating a crowded restaurant floor. Min Seok's men were watching Jae-min, focused on the confrontation, not on the woman who'd learned long ago how to be overlooked. She reached Min Seok's car parked near the loading dock. Bulletproof, expensive, exactly the kind of upgrade a lieutenant shouldn't be able to afford on his salary. The door was locked, but the window was cracked just enough. She slipped the USB drive through the gap, letting it fall onto the driver's seat, where it would be found during the inevitable search. But she also pulled out the second drive, the one containing emails between Min Seok and the Hwang family, detailing not just the coup, but Min Seok's promise to eliminate the organization's other loyal members once he took power. Names Ammani recognized from the safe house, the grocery store owners, the young woman with scars, Junho's mother. She plugged it into the laptop mounted in Min Seok's dashboard, a tactical display he used to coordinate operations, and set the files to broadcast to every phone in the organization's network. By the time she slipped back into the shadows, Min Seok's phone was buzzing, then his men's phones, then everyone's. "You wanted proof?" Jae-min's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Check your messages." Min Seok's men read the messages in silence, their expressions shifting from confusion to comprehension to something darker. Betrayal had layers, and they were seeing all of them at once, not just the attempt on Jae-min's life, but the plan to eliminate anyone who might question the new regime. Their names were on that list, their families. When Min Seok reached for his weapon, his own men stopped him, not with violence, but with the kind of cold withdrawal that hurt worse than any bullet. They stepped back, leaving him exposed, isolated in the center of the warehouse with nowhere left to run. "You wanted an empire built on fear," Jae-min said quietly. "But fear only works when people believe you're stronger than their principles. These men aren't afraid of you anymore. They're just disappointed." Ammani watched from the shadows as Min Seok was escorted out by men who'd once called him brother. There would be consequences. She wasn't naive enough to think otherwise. But they'd happen far from here, in the parts of this world she'd chosen not to see. She'd seen enough tonight. 3 weeks later, Ammani sat in her pharmacology lecture taking notes on drug interactions and therapeutic indices when her phone buzzed with a notification from the registrar's office. She opened it during the break, expecting a reminder about upcoming deadlines. Instead, she found a receipt. Her tuition for the remaining semester paid in full. Her student loans cleared. A stipend for living expenses deposited into her account with a note that simply read, "For services rendered, professional consultation fee." She knew better than to question the source. That night, when she arrived for her shift at the restaurant, because she'd refused to quit, refused to let fear dictate her choices, she found an envelope waiting for her in her locker. Inside was a business card, blank, except for a phone number, and a handwritten note in precise English. "You have steady hands and a steadier heart. Both are rare. If you ever need anything,
Or if I need a reminder that mercy isn't weakness, call JM. Ammani tucked the card into her wallet, behind her nursing school ID, and went back to work. She noticed them sometimes in the weeks that followed. The man at the corner table who stayed too long over cold coffee, the car that idled outside her apartment building when she worked late shifts, the way certain problems in her neighborhood, the ones that used to escalate into violence, suddenly resolved themselves before blood was shed. Protection, she realized, not control. The difference mattered. She graduated top of her class that spring, walked across the stage to accept her nursing degree, and saw Heroine in the audience, Junho beside her, both of them applauding. Ammani had spent years perfecting invisibility, believing safety came from staying neutral, but she'd learned something in that warehouse, standing in the shadows while truth became a weapon. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was choose to be seen, to use your skills not to hide, but to heal, and to trust that some debts were paid not in silence, but in the steady protection of people who understood that real strength looked like mercy.